The small town was quiet, its streets lined with worn cobblestones and small shops that had been there for decades. People greeted each other on the streets, and life moved slowly, almost like it had no hurry at all. The town had its own charm, the kind that made outsiders think it was forgotten by time. But for the people who lived there, it was home, a place where everyone knew everyone else, and news traveled faster than anywhere else. On a chilly morning, a black car rolled into the town square, its engine a rare sound in this calm place. From the car stepped a man who looked like he belonged to another world. He was tall, sharp-looking, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that had probably cost more than most people in the town earned in a year. His hair was neatly combed, and he carried himself with a confidence that made people step aside, almost instinctively. He was a man used to attention, used to being admired and praised wherever he went. He walked past the bakery, the grocery store, and the little bookstore where old books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. People stopped and stared, whispering to each other. Some were curious, some impressed, and some a little jealous of the way he carried himself. He didn't seem to notice them. His eyes were focused ahead, moving with purpose. He had come for a reason, and nothing in this quiet town could distract him from it. Inside the town hall, preparations were already underway for the evening's event. A small stage had been set up, a few chairs arranged neatly in rows, and a piano that had seen better days rested in the center. The hall was not big, but it had character, with tall windows letting in the late morning sunlight and wooden beams that creaked when walked upon. It was the kind of place that had hosted countless community gatherings, weddings, and school performances over the years. The man entered the hall, and immediately the air seemed to change. He moved toward the piano with a confident stride, his, fingers brushing over the keys as if claiming them for his own. The sound that came from the piano was precise, almost mechanical, but flawless. He played a few notes, not a full piece, just enough to make it clear to anyone listening that he was extraordinary. He had trained for years, studied under the best teachers, and traveled the world performing in grand concert halls. And yet, here he was, in a small town, testing his presence among people who had never seen anything like him. Outside, the townspeople were gathering, drawn by curiosity and the announcement of the man's arrival. They had heard he was a pianist of great renown, someone whose performances were talked about in cities far away. For a place that rarely saw visitors, especially those who moved in circles of fame and wealth, it was exciting and a little intimidating. The man, for his part, seemed slightly bored. The town was not like the cities he was used to, with grand theaters and crowded concert halls. He liked challenges, and he liked to be admired, but he also liked to feel that he was the best, that no one could match him. He had come with the assumption that no one in this quiet place could possibly rival his skill, and that belief filled him with a mix of amusement and mild annoyance. As he explored the hall, adjusting the piano bench and tapping a few keys, he noticed the small details. The scratches on the floor from years of chairs being moved, the faded curtains, the old sheet music left behind by students long gone. To him, it was not impressive, but there was something comforting about it, even if he would never admit it out loud. It reminded him of the simplicity he often avoided in his life, a life filled with constant travel, crowded stages, and the pressures of fame. The townspeople continued to arrive, filling the hall with quiet murmurs. Some had brought children, some had come alone, and some had come with friends just to witness the arrival of someone who seemed so different from anyone they had ever met. They whispered about the man, trying to guess what he would do, what he would say, and how he would perform. There was a mix of skepticism and excitement in the air. This was something new, something unusual for their everyday lives. He noticed a few familiar faces from the town's previous events. The music teacher, A gentle older man with gray hair and kind eyes came forward to greet him, offering a polite handshake. The man responded with a nod, acknowledging him without much warmth. He had little patience for small talk, and even less for flattery. His mind was already on the performance, on the notes he would play, and on the audience he would impress. The piano itself had seen better days, but he treated it as if it were a grand concert instrument. He adjusted the bench, checked the pedals, and ran his fingers lightly over the keys. Each note he played was exact, sharp, and clear. He could feel the room responding, the small crowd leaning in slightly as they listened. It was enough to make him smirk. In a room like this, he would be the center of attention, as he always was. As the morning moved into afternoon, the hall began to feel alive. The townspeople chatted quietly, the sunlight casting patterns on the wooden floor, and the man continued to explore the piano, occasionally glancing at the small audience around him. He was calculating, observing, and already forming opinions about what he would do once the event began. He was confident, perhaps overconfident, that this would be an easy performance, one where he would shine effortlessly. Outside the hall, life in the town went on as usual. Children played near the fountain, shopkeepers went about their work, and a few elders sat on benches, watching the world move slowly. There was a sense of peace here, a rhythm that the man had never experienced in the cities he frequented. He could see it in the way people interacted, in the simplicity of their daily lives, and in the care they gave to each other. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar curiosity, perhaps, or even respect for this quiet existence. But he quickly dismissed it, focusing instead on the coming event. Inside, the piano continued to be his focus. He practiced a few complex pieces, fingers flying across the keys with precision. Each note echoed through the hall, filling the space with sound that was both beautiful and commanding. He was in his element here, in control, performing with the kind of skill that could silence any crowd. And yet, as he played, he noticed something unusual. From the corner of the room, he could see a door slightly ajar, a room beyond it where faint music seemed to be coming from. Curious, he paused, listening. The music was simple, not technical, but it had a warmth to it that his own playing lacked. It was heartfelt, honest, and completely unaffected by the desire to impress. He frowned slightly, intrigued and somewhat irritated. Who was playing, and why did it sound like that? He was used to being the best, to being the one who drew attention, and yet here was something that caught his ear without trying. His ego bristled at the thought that someone in this quiet town could play with such depth. He moved toward the door, peeking inside, and saw a figure sitting at another piano. The person was modestly dressed, focused on the keys, and completely unaware of the world outside. The music was gentle, expressive, and filled with emotion that he couldn't quite put into words. He listened for a moment, then quietly retreated, not wanting to interrupt, but his mind was racing. He had never encountered someone like this before in his life, someone whose playing could touch him in a way that technical perfection never had. As the afternoon turned into evening, the hall filled completely. People from all around the town had come, curious to see this man who had traveled so far to play in their little community. There was excitement in the air, a buzz that made the space feel smaller and warmer. The man stood near the piano, observing, waiting for the right moment to take the stage. He was ready, confident that he would be the star, that the night would unfold exactly as he intended. And yet, in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the memory of the music from the small room. It was haunting, not in a frightening way, but in a way that made him pause and reconsider. He had always believed that mastery of the instrument was about skill, about flawless execution. But here was something different, something that spoke to the heart rather than the mind. The town was buzzing with anticipation now. Families whispered to each other, Children fidgeted in their seats, and the few older residents smiled knowingly, having seen countless performances in their lives. They could feel that this night would be memorable, though they didn't yet understand why. And the man, standing by the piano, adjusted his cuffs, straightened his posture, and prepared to play, unaware that the simple music he had overheard earlier would change everything he thought he knew about performance and talent. The stage was set, the audience ready, and the man took a deep breath. He glanced once more toward the door at the back of the hall, where he had glimpsed the other player, and then turned back to the piano. His fingers hovered over the keys, poised, ready to begin. The notes that would soon fill the hall were technically perfect, as always. But in that quiet moment, before the first chord, he had no idea that the night would not unfold as he expected, that his assumptions about music, talent, and the people around him were about to be challenged in a way he could never have imagined. In the same small town, just beyond the busy streets and quiet corners, lived a woman who most people thought of as simple. She had a calm life, one filled with daily routines and small joys. She worked in a bakery, waking up early each morning to knead dough and bake bread, the smell of fresh pastries filling the little shop. People liked her for her kindness and patience, though few ever thought of her as someone who could step into the spotlight. She spent her free time teaching music to children at the community center, using an old piano that had seen better days. It wasn't a grand instrument, not even close to the ones found in concert halls, but it had a warmth that matched her own gentle nature. She played without concern for perfection, letting her feelings guide the notes. To her, music was not about impressing others. It was about expression, about sharing stories without words. On the morning the elite pianist arrived, she was in the bakery, carefully arranging pastries on the shelves. The news of his arrival had reached the town quickly, and some of her students had whispered about it earlier. She had listened politely, but didn't pay much attention. To her, life moved at its own pace, and she had little interest in fame or contests. The idea of someone showing up from the outside and drawing attention to themselves did not stir jealousy or admiration in her. It simply seemed another unusual event in a town full of quiet surprises. Later, when she went to the community center for her usual teaching, she noticed the hall buzzing with activity. People were setting up chairs, moving the piano slightly to the center, and talking in excited tones about the pianist who had arrived. She paused at the door for a moment, observing without stepping inside. Something about the way the crowd gathered and the attention focused on one person made her uneasy. She was not used to being surrounded by strangers or by excitement that made people forget everything else. Curiosity, however, is hard to ignore. She walked closer, drawn by a faint sound that was different from the commotion around her. The piano in the center of the hall had been touched, and she could hear the sharp, precise notes of a man who was clearly well trained. She recognized skill immediately, having spent years playing herself, even if in a more modest setting. The sound was perfect, almost too perfect, and she felt a small pang of disconnection from it. It was music that demanded attention and admiration, but it lacked the warmth she valued. She stepped into the room, careful not to disturb anyone, and found a corner where she could watch without being noticed. The man was tall, confident, and completely aware of the effect he had on people. He moved like someone who expected to be the center of every eye in the room. She watched as he played, noting the precision of his fingers, the smooth motion of his hands, and the pride that lingered in his expression. To most, he seemed untouchable, a figure from a world very different from their own dot. As she listened, a mix of curiosity and quiet amusement rose inside her. She wondered what it would be like to meet someone so focused on perfection, someone who could perform flawlessly, but might never feel the music as she did. She had encountered skill before, of course, but it was always in a different context, among children or in small gatherings where mistakes were part of the charm. This was different. This was a man who had trained for years, who had traveled the world to play for audiences who expected brilliance at every note. The crowd grew larger, filling the hall with anticipation. Some people recognized her from her teaching, and they smiled and nodded, inviting her to join them. She smiled back politely, but she remained in the shadows, observing the man who seemed so certain of himself. There was a part of her that wanted to speak, to offer a simple word of encouragement, but she held back. She preferred to watch quietly, to understand the scene without becoming a part of it. As the morning turned into afternoon, the man paused and looked around, adjusting the piano and checking the seating arrangement. He noticed the little door at the back of the hall, slightly ajar, and a flicker of interest crossed his face. That door led to a small practice room, one that the woman used regularly. He stepped toward it, curious about the faint sounds that had reached him before. She noticed him moving, but she stayed in the shadows, unsure of what he intended. When he peered inside, he saw her at the piano, playing softly, lost in her own world. The music was simple, yet it carried a depth that surprised him. Each note seemed to have meaning, a story wrapped in emotion, something he had rarely encountered in his years of technical mastery. He felt an unusual tug in his chest, a mixture of intrigue and irritation. How could someone so ordinary produce music that felt so alive while he had spent a lifetime perfecting precision? He stepped back quickly, not wanting to reveal his reaction. His pride would not allow him to admit curiosity, let alone admiration, for someone who seemed so modest and unassuming. And yet, the sound lingered in his mind, haunting in a quiet way that he could not ignore. He returned to the center of the hall, brushing away the thought, convinced that it was only a fleeting distraction. The townspeople, meanwhile, continued to prepare for the evening event. Chairs were arranged, lights adjusted, and a sense of excitement grew with each passing hour. Some whispered about the mysterious music from the practice room, speculating about who could be playing so beautifully. Few realized that the player was someone they knew well, someone whose life was ordinary in many ways, yet extraordinary in the way she expressed herself through music. The woman continued her work, unaware that she was being observed. She played with her heart, her fingers moving naturally over the keys, producing melodies that were simple, clear, and full of feeling. Each note seemed to resonate with the room itself, softening the edges of the hall, bringing warmth to the otherwise formal and tense atmosphere created by the arrival of the elite pianist. A few of the children she taught peeked through the door, recognizing her and giggling softly. She smiled at them without stopping, nodding gently, letting them feel included without interrupting her playing. There was an ease to her that made people want to listen, not because they were impressed by skill, but because they were drawn to the honesty in her music. The man noticed them too, the children and the woman together, and for a moment he felt an unfamiliar sensation. It was not jealousy, exactly, but a challenge to his assumptions. He had always believed that skill alone commanded respect, that mastery was about being flawless and admired. Yet here was someone whose playing demanded attention for entirely different reasons, not because it was perfect, but because it felt real, because it spoke to the listeners in a way his music rarely did. Time passed quickly, and soon it was late afternoon. The hall was nearly ready, and the townspeople gathered near the entrance, waiting for the event to begin. The woman closed the small practice room door and stepped into the main hall, carrying herself with quiet confidence. She did not seek attention, but there was a calm presence about her that made people notice. The elite pianist glanced at her briefly, intrigued by her demeanor, though he could not yet understand what it meant. She moved to a corner of the hall, choosing a spot where she could watch without being the center of attention. Her presence was gentle, unassuming, yet somehow commanding in its quiet way. She listened as the man warmed up at the piano, watching the precise movements of his hands and the way he commanded the room. She felt no fear, no sense of competition. She simply observed, curious about the man who had come from far away. Someone so different from the life she knew. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows through the tall windows, the hall grew still. The moment for the event was approaching, and the crowd held its collective breath. The woman could feel the tension, the anticipation, and yet she remained calm. Music to her was never about pressure or expectation. It was about connection, about sharing something from the heart. And even as the elite pianist prepared to play, she knew that her music would speak in its own way. Regardless of the skill surrounding her, a soft murmur passed through the crowd as the first notes of the evening began. The pianist's performance started, precise and technical, each chord executed flawlessly. People clapped politely, impressed by the skill and confidence on display. The woman watched silently, letting the sound wash over her, noting both the beauty and the absence of warmth in the performance. It was a reminder to her of why she played the way she did, why music was about feeling, not perfection. As the first piece ended, the audience applauded, and the man stood, bowing slightly with a proud smile. He glanced toward the corner where the woman sat, not yet fully aware of her potential. But in that moment, a challenge began to form in his mind, fueled by the curiosity and irritation sparked by her earlier playing. He had not expected anyone in this small town to leave an impression, and yet she had. The evening was far from over, and the stage was set for a meeting that neither of them could have predicted, one that would challenge assumptions, pride, and the very understanding of what music truly meant. As the evening approached, the town hall seemed alive in a way that was unusual for the quiet town. People arrived steadily, bringing with them a mixture of excitement and curiosity. The air was filled with low chatter, the rustle of clothing, and the occasional creak of chairs being moved to make space. There was an anticipation that grew with each passing minute, a feeling that something unusual was about to happen. The elite pianist stood near the piano, adjusting the bench and preparing his sheet music, confident that the night would unfold according to his expectations. The woman, meanwhile, moved through the crowd quietly, her presence barely noticeable. She carried herself with calmness, smiling softly at those who greeted her, yet she was focused on something deeper. Her mind was not on the audience or the event itself, but on the music she would play, the feelings she wanted to share, and the children who had inspired her melodies. She had played in this hall before, though never with such attention or such a large crowd, yet she felt no fear. Music, to her, was always a bridge between hearts, and that thought kept her grounded. The townspeople were buzzing with excitement. They had seen her teach, heard her play, and admired her dedication to the children and the community. Yet tonight, they wondered what it would be like to hear her in the same hall as a world-class pianist. Some whispered quietly, questioning whether her simple, heartfelt music could stand against the technical mastery of the man who had traveled from far away. Others were confident that talent and sincerity could shine through any stage. The mix of curiosity and expectation made the hall feel like it was on the edge of something significant. Back near the piano, the pianist was checking his notes and rehearsing in small bursts. Each movement of his fingers was precise, each chord executed with perfection. He had done this countless times before, performed in grand concert halls, and received standing ovations from audiences who expected nothing less than brilliance. He was confident, almost too confident, that his performance would leave the audience in awe. He allowed himself a small smirk as he glanced toward the back of the hall, where the woman had taken her place. There was a flicker of curiosity, of mild irritation even, that she seemed unaffected by the spectacle of his preparation. As the crowd continued to gather, the woman found a quiet spot near the piano. close enough to observe, far enough to avoid attention. She watched the pianist carefully, noticing the way he moved, the intensity in his eyes, and the pride that radiated from him. It was clear to her that he had trained for years, that every gesture was calculated, every note perfected. Yet there was something missing, something that she understood in a way that experience and technical skill alone could never capture. Music, she thought, was about more than skill. It was about emotion, connection, and honesty. The event began as the first few people settled into their seats. A hush fell over the hall, the kind that accompanies moments when everyone senses that something important is about to happen. The pianist took his place, fingers poised over the keys. He played the first few notes, precise and clear, demonstrating the skill that had earned him fame and recognition. The audience responded with polite applause, impressed by the flawless execution, yet not moved in the way they would be by music that spoke directly to the heart. The woman listened attentively, absorbing the performance with both appreciation and critical thought. She admired the skill, but recognized the difference between playing for admiration and playing for connection. Her own music had always been about sharing experiences, emotions, and stories, even when it was just a simple melody on a well-worn piano. She felt no envy, only a deep curiosity about what it would take to bridge the gap between technical mastery and emotional truth. As the pianist finished his piece, the applause was loud and sincere. He stood, bowing gracefully, a confident smile on his face. The woman nodded in recognition, her expression calm and thoughtful. She did not rush forward or seek attention. She understood that the next steps were delicate, that any interaction between them would need to happen naturally. The audience, unaware of the quiet tension building between the two, continued to chatter softly, enjoying the evening and the unexpected excitement that had arrived in their town. Backstage, the pianist was restless. He paced slightly, reviewing his next piece in his mind, yet he could not shake the faint memory of the music he had heard from the small room earlier in the day. It was simple, yet hauntingly expressive, and it lingered in his mind in a way that perfection had never done. He had never encountered someone who could play with such honesty, and the thought unsettled him. For a man who had spent his life mastering control, the idea that someone could move hearts without technical brilliance was both intriguing and challenging. Meanwhile, the woman moved closer to the piano, not to interrupt, but to feel the energy of the hall and the instrument beneath her fingers. She played a few soft notes, testing the keys, listening to how the sound filled the space. Each note resonated, blending with the memories and emotions that filled the hall. She felt the weight of the audience's anticipation, yet it did not sway her. Her focus remained on the music itself, on the story she wished to convey, and the connection she hoped to create. The townspeople noticed the subtle difference in the atmosphere as she touched the piano. Even though her performance had not yet begun, there was a presence about her, a calm confidence that drew attention without demanding it. Some leaned forward, curious about who she was and what she might do. Others remembered her lessons and community work, realizing that she had a depth that had always been quietly evident but never fully showcased. The energy in the hall shifted slightly, an unspoken sense of anticipation mixing with the excitement of the evening. As the night wore on, the pianist and the woman remained aware of each other. He felt a growing need to assert his skill, to ensure that his performance would be remembered as the highlight of the evening. She, on the other hand, remained centered, understanding that her moment would come naturally, without rush or force. There was an unspoken tension building, a subtle acknowledgement of potential and challenge. Both were preparing in their own ways, each guided by different principles and expectations. The event organizers moved quietly around the hall, adjusting lights, checking the microphone, and ensuring that everything was ready. They had not anticipated this quiet dynamic between the two performers, the subtle challenge forming without words. Yet they sensed it in the glances exchanged, the careful attention, and the quiet focus that filled the space. It added a layer of anticipation that made the evening feel even more special. Outside the hall, the town continued its quiet life, unaware of the emotional undercurrent growing within the building. The smell of baked bread from the woman's shop lingered in the cool evening air, a gentle reminder of ordinary life and the human connections that formed the foundation of the community. It was a world away from the expectations of the elite pianist, yet the two would soon meet in a way that blended both worlds into a single, unforgettable experience. Inside, the woman took a moment to breathe deeply, letting her hands rest on the keys. She thought of the children she taught, of the small victories and moments of joy she had shared with them. She thought of her own journey with music, of the quiet determination it had taken to learn and grow without recognition or applause. Her mind was clear, her focus steady, and her heart ready for the connection that music could create. The pianist, in contrast, reviewed every technical detail in his mind. Every chord, every dynamic, every crescendo. He was confident, almost to the point of arrogance, that his mastery would be undeniable. Yet beneath the surface, he could not ignore the memory of the music from earlier, the gentle, heartfelt playing of someone who had never sought fame, but had created something pure and moving. That memory lingered, a silent challenge he could not yet name. As the audience settled, the lights dimmed slightly, creating a soft glow that illuminated the stage and the piano. The hall seemed to hold its breath, the quiet energy of anticipation palpable. The woman stepped forward, not with a desire to compete, but with a sense of purpose, ready to let her music speak. She approached the piano, her fingers lightly brushing the keys, feeling the resonance and warmth of the instrument. The crowd grew silent, sensing that something special was about to unfold. The pianist observed her carefully, his expression a mix of curiosity and disbelief. He had expected the evening to follow a simple pattern: his brilliance, applause, and admiration. He had not anticipated the quiet presence of someone whose music could challenge his assumptions without a single note played. A subtle tension formed between them, an unspoken recognition that the night would not proceed as he had imagined. As she began to play, the first notes were soft, simple, yet filled with depth. The audience listened, captivated by the honesty and emotion carried in each sound. The pianist felt a strange sensation, an unfamiliar mix of awe and uncertainty as the music unfolded. It was not about speed, skill, or perfection. It was about heart, story, and connection. The evening had shifted, and both performers understood that the coming moments would redefine their understanding of music. Talent and presence. The woman's hands moved naturally over the keys, each note delib. The hall had grown quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. Every chair was filled, and the audience leaned forward slightly, as if even a small movement might disturb the delicate tension. The elite pianist sat at the grand piano, his posture perfect, hands poised above the keys. He had been the center of attention for years, used to adoration and applause, and tonight should have been no different. Yet the presence of the woman in the corner created a subtle shift, something he couldn't ignore. She was quiet, unassuming, but the faint trace of her music from earlier lingered in his mind. An unexpected challenge. He began the first notes of his piece, a complex composition filled with rapid runs, sharp chords, and dramatic flourishes. Every movement was precise, every chord executed flawlessly. The audience responded immediately, impressed by his skill, the speed of his fingers, and the clarity of the music. It was exactly what they had expected from someone of his reputation. Applause was already building in the back of the hall, and he smiled slightly, knowing he had captured attention. This was his element, the world he understood, where control and precision ruled. The woman remained silent, her eyes fixed on him, watching not just the music, but the man playing it. She noted the perfection, the elegance, and the technical brilliance, yet she did not feel compelled to compete immediately. For her, music was not about showing superiority. It was about truth. She allowed the pianist to play, letting the sound fill the hall, absorbing the reactions of the audience, and understanding the space. She did not need to rush. The right moment would come naturally. As he reached the crescendo of his piece, the audience clapped, and some even gasped at the speed and complexity of his performance. The man looked toward the woman with a faint smirk, confident in his display. He assumed she was impressed, perhaps even intimidated. That assumption was a habit for him, one that had never been challenged before. But this time, there was a subtle tension, a spark in her eyes that he could not decipher. It was not fear or awe. It was calm observation, and it unsettled him in a way he did not expect. He finished his performance with a dramatic flourish, the final chord ringing out and hanging in the air. Applause erupted, loud and enthusiastic, and he rose, bowing with the assurance of someone used to being celebrated. His smile was confident, a little arrogant even, as he looked toward the audience for recognition. He turned his gaze toward the woman, expecting admiration, but instead he found curiosity and quiet resolve. She did not clap immediately, nor did she rush to acknowledge his skill. She simply waited, as if measuring not his performance, but the moment that would follow. The audience noticed her stillness and leaned forward, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Whispers began, small and uncertain, but filled with anticipation. The woman stepped toward the piano, her presence understated yet magnetic. She did not speak, did not make any grand gesture. She simply sat down, adjusted the bench slightly, and let her hands rest on the keys. There was no pretense, no showmanship, just a quiet readiness that held the attention of everyone in the room. The elite pianist's expression shifted slightly, from confidence to something closer to caution. He had expected admiration, not a challenge, yet the simple act of her sitting at the piano felt like a challenge in itself. He watched as she began to play, her fingers moving gently, naturally, without the urgency of perfection. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but there was a depth to them that immediately drew the audience's attention. It was music that did not need to impress. It simply existed, full of emotion, feeling, and honesty. The contrast was immediate and striking. Where the man's playing was precise, perfect, and dramatic, hers was gentle, expressive, and alive. The audience leaned forward, sensing the difference, captivated by the warmth and sincerity of her music. It was not technical brilliance that held them. It was connection, the feeling that each note carried a story, a memory, a fragment of the human experience. Some closed their eyes, allowing the music to wash over them. Moved in ways that applause and recognition alone could never achieve, the elite pianist felt a strange sensation, a mixture of disbelief, intrigue, and something he had never admitted to himself, vulnerability. He had never been challenged in this way before. His life had been built around skill, speed, and perfection, and yet here was someone who could captivate without any of those things. Each note she played seemed to reach into the room and touch the listeners directly, bypassing the intellect and speaking straight to the heart. He realized, for the first time, that mastery alone was not the measure of music. As she continued, the audience became increasingly silent, mesmerized. The woman's music was not loud or showy, but it filled the room in a way that was intimate and powerful at the same time. She drew on memories, emotions, and experiences that were personal, yet universal in their impact. Every chord, every pause, every soft trill seemed deliberate yet free, creating a tapestry of sound that no technical display could replicate. People leaned forward instinctively, Some moved to tears, others holding their breath in awe of the authenticity. The elite pianist tried to continue his own performance, attempting to match the intensity of her expression with speed and technical mastery. But something had shifted. The audience's attention had moved subtly, completely absorbed in the raw emotion she was conveying. His notes, while flawless, began to feel hollow in comparison. He played faster, harder, trying to assert dominance through complexity, but the effect was muted. The room had changed, the energy had shifted, and he felt the first cracks in the confidence he had carried for years. He paused briefly, glancing at her hands as they moved over the keys. There was no hesitation, no desire to compete in the traditional sense, only a natural flow of music that spoke to the listeners without needing approval. The pianist's fingers hovered uncertainly over the keys, a rare moment of hesitation in a lifetime of control. He realized, with growing astonishment, that this was a performance unlike any he had experienced. It was not a duel in the way he had imagined. It was something deeper, more human, more true. The audience was fully captivated now. Some whispered softly, unable to believe the contrast. Others simply sat in silence, allowing themselves to be moved. The music created a shared experience, a quiet communion between the performer and the listeners. It was a reminder of why people loved music, not for accolades or recognition, but for the way it could connect hearts and souls across differences. The hall seemed to breathe with the sound, each note a ripple of emotion that reached every corner. The woman's expression remained calm, focused, yet serene. She was aware of the pianist, of his attempts to impress, but she did not falter or react. Her music was not about defeating anyone. It was about expressing what she had carried within her for years. Memories of early mornings teaching children, the quiet joy of baking bread, the simple moments that shaped her life, all of it flowed through her fingers into the music. She was not performing for applause. She was performing for truth, and the audience felt it immediately. The pianist watched, slowly realizing that the night was no longer under his control. His years of training, his mastery of technique, all of it seemed secondary to the honesty in her playing. A subtle regret began to grow within him, a recognition that he had underestimated her, underestimated the power of simple, heartfelt expression. For the first time, he questioned the assumptions that had guided his life. The belief that brilliance alone commanded attention and admiration. He continued to play alongside her, trying to match the intensity, but it felt different now. His fingers moved, the notes rang out, yet there was a hollowness in comparison. The audience responded differently, their attention torn between the flawless execution of the man and the soulful storytelling of the woman. The contrast was undeniable, and with each passing measure, it became increasingly clear who held the true emotional power in the room. Minutes passed, and the music swelled to a gentle climax. The pianist's heart raced, not with triumph, but with an unfamiliar feeling, humility. He had faced many stages, many audiences, but never had he encountered someone who could touch hearts in this quiet, profound way without technical showmanship. The realization settled heavily upon him, a mix of awe, respect, and regret. Finally, the woman allowed the final note to linger, soft and deliberate, filling the hall with a sense of completion. Silence followed, the kind that speaks louder than applause, a shared moment of understanding between performer, audience, and the man who had thought he would dominate the night. The hall held its breath for a moment longer, and then the applause erupted, spontaneous, genuine, and overwhelming. People rose to their feet, moved not by skill alone, but by the honesty, courage, and humanity of what they had just witnessed. The pianist sat in stunned silence, the reality sinking in. He had assumed mastery was enough, that the world would always bow to technical brilliance. But tonight, he had learned something new. The woman had not sought to impress, to dominate, or to compete. She had simply played her truth, and in doing so, she had reshaped the expectations of everyone in the room, including him. He felt a profound shift within himself, a lesson in humility and humanity that would stay with him far longer than any applause. The room was quiet, but the quiet carried weight. Every person in the hall had been held in a state of anticipation by the simple, honest, yet profound performance of the woman. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, and when she began to play again, the first notes were not rushed or loud, but soft, deliberate, and full of feeling. Each note seemed to carry a fragment of her life, a memory, or a thought that could not be expressed in words. The audience leaned in instinctively, captivated, sensing that what they were about to hear was more than music, it was a story. The elite pianist sat nearby, hands folded in his lap, watching her every movement. He had expected the evening to be an easy display of his own brilliance, a demonstration of skill that would leave the audience applauding him and nothing more. Instead, he found himself humbled, unsure of how to respond to the depth and sincerity of her playing. Each note she produced carried warmth, human feeling, and a truth that no technical perfection could replicate. He had encountered talent many times, but never honesty like this. It was unsettling in a way he had never experienced. Her music grew steadily, each chord carefully chosen, yet flowing naturally. There were no dramatic flourishes, no display of speed or complexity. Instead, there was expression, patience, and a profound connection to every emotion she had felt in her life. People in the audience were silent, listening not with curiosity, but with open hearts. Some had tears in their eyes. Others smiled softly, remembering memories from their own lives that her music had unlocked. It was as if her fingers could reach into the room and touch every soul individually, offering a shared experience that was both intimate and universal. The pianist felt a stirring in his chest, a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had been taught that precision, technique, and control were the measures of true skill. Yet here was someone with no formal accolades, no recognition from the world outside this small town, producing music that resonated deeper than any applause could. His hands itched to play, to assert control, but he hesitated, realizing that in this moment, his technical mastery could not compete with authenticity. It was a lesson in humility he had not expected to learn. She continued her performance, letting her memories guide the melody. She thought of quiet mornings teaching children, of laughter shared, and of moments of solitude in the bakery as the town slept. She drew from experiences that had shaped her, translating them into sound. Every pause was intentional, every note deliberate, yet it felt spontaneous and free. The music was alive, moving organically with emotion, telling a story the audience could feel but not see. It was simple in structure, but extraordinary in impact that the audience was transfixed. Some leaned forward, hands clasped, captivated by the raw emotion emanating from the piano. Others closed their eyes, allowing the sound to fill their senses completely. The hall seemed to breathe with the music, the warmth and sincerity, creating an invisible thread connecting every person present. The energy of the room was palpable, alive with the shared humanity that great art can evoke. There was no need for grand gestures or showmanship. The music itself was enough to command attention and respect. The pianist felt a mixture of admiration and regret. He had never been so deeply moved by someone who played without concern for recognition. His own performances were meticulous, planned, and executed for maximum impact. Yet tonight he understood that the heart of music was not in display, but in connection. He remembered the first notes he had heard from her earlier in the day, played in a small, quiet room, and realized that it had been a preview of what was now unfolding before the audience. The realization hit him hard. He had underestimated her entirely. The woman's performance grew, flowing naturally from soft, reflective passages to moments of gentle intensity. She did not try to impress or dominate, but the subtle power of her music demanded attention. Each note carried a story, and the audience responded instinctively, moved by the honesty and clarity of emotion. There were no mistakes, but there were also no calculated tricks or technical flourishes. It was not performance in the traditional sense. It was expression, pure and unfiltered. The hall seemed to disappear around the audience. The tall windows, the wooden beams, and the chairs faded from awareness as the music enveloped everyone. People were no longer merely listeners. They were participants in the emotional journey she had created. Laughter, tears, sighs, and smiles intertwined as the music resonated, weaving a tapestry of shared experience that transcended words. Each person felt connected to something greater, a reminder of the power of art to bring humanity together. The pianist could not help but be drawn in. He had trained for decades, performed in grand halls, and been celebrated by critics and audiences alike, yet he felt a sense of vulnerability he had never experienced. He wanted to play, to show that skill still mattered, but he realized that in this moment, the true mastery was hers. She was not performing for applause or recognition. She was performing for truth, and the authenticity of her music held a power he could not match with technique alone. He watched as she moved seamlessly from one section of her piece to another. Her fingers danced lightly over the keys, never forcing, never striking harshly, but conveying every thought and feeling with clarity. There was an intimacy in her performance that made each listener feel personally involved. People were moved in ways they could not explain, touched by a beauty that came not from spectacle, but from sincerity. It was a lesson in simplicity, honesty, and human connection. The music flowed, moments of gentle reflection giving way to passages of quiet intensity. The pianist realized that she was telling a story, one that was both her own and universally relatable. He recognized themes of longing, joy, loss, and hope within her melodies. Every note was purposeful, yet completely natural, as if her emotions themselves were guiding the composition. The audience responded instinctively, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes, all absorbed by the depth of feeling in the room. The woman's expression was calm, serene, focused entirely on the music. She did not glance at the audience or the pianist. Her attention was inward, connected to the story she was telling. The pianist watched her, fascinated, seeing for the first time that the essence of music was not control, but connection. Her presence and performance redefined what he thought he knew about art, talent, and the human experience. Minutes passed, and the music reached a gentle climax. There was no grand, dramatic finale, only a natural culmination that felt complete, perfect in its authenticity. She allowed the final note to linger, soft and deliberate, resonating through the hall. The audience remained silent for a moment longer, caught in the afterglow of the performance, before erupting into heartfelt applause. People stood, cheered, some clapping with tears in their eyes, others simply smiling, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling they had just experienced. The pianist remained seated, stunned. He had expected to be the star, to be the one celebrated for his brilliance, yet he felt only awe and humility. He had been reminded that true artistry was not in speed, precision, or showmanship, but in honesty, heart, and human connection. The woman had achieved something rare and extraordinary. She had reached every listener, touched hearts, and left a mark that would not be measured by skill alone. As the applause continued, she bowed slightly, acknowledging the audience with gentle grace. She had shared her music fully, completely, and without concern for the spotlight. She had performed not for herself, but for the people, for the emotions that could not be spoken, and for the simple truth of her own life. And in doing so, she had revealed a depth of artistry far beyond technical brilliance. The pianist finally stood, slowly approaching the stage. There was no smirk, No performance of pride, only quiet admiration and a hint of humility. He extended his hand toward her, not as a competitor, but as someone recognizing the profound truth in what she had done. The moment was quiet, yet heavy with meaning. He had challenged her, expecting an easy victory, and yet he had been shown something he had never anticipated: the power of authenticity, the beauty of sincerity, and the depth of human emotion expressed through music. The audience continued to cheer, moved not only by the performance, but by the unspoken understanding between the two musicians. In that moment, there was no competition, no rivalry, only acknowledgement of the extraordinary connection that music could create. The hall seemed alive with shared emotion, a testament to the simple yet profound power of heartfelt artistry. The woman stepped back from the piano, her calm demeanor unchanged. She had performed her truth, and it had been received fully. The pianist, once confident in his superiority, now recognized the lesson she had imparted: that music was not just about skill, recognition, or mastery, but about heart, soul, and human connection. In that quiet understanding, both performers had discovered something invaluable, a truth that would shape their lives and their music for years to come. The night lingered in the minds of all who were present. People left the hall slowly, still discussing the performance, still processing the emotions they had experienced. The pianist remained near the stage, deep in thought, contemplating the meaning of what he had witnessed. And the woman, serene and unassuming, packed her sheet music and stepped into the night, leading behind it. The night was quiet, but it was alive in a way that could not be measured by sound alone. The audience slowly left the hall, still buzzing with emotion and discussion, talking in hushed voices about the music they had just experienced. Many lingered at the doors, unwilling to leave immediately, replaying in their minds the gentle, expressive notes that had filled the space. It was a performance they would remember for years, one that had touched them in ways beyond applause or recognition. Outside, the small town was calm, the streets illuminated softly by street lamps, and the world seemed different than it had before the evening began. The elite pianist remained by the grand piano, hands resting lightly on the polished surface, still processing what had just happened. He had faced countless stages, performed before thousands, and received accolades from critics and audiences alike, but nothing had ever moved him in the way the woman's music had. He had come to the town expecting to impress, to dominate the evening with technical brilliance and confident performance, yet the reality was far different. The truth of what he had witnessed weighed on him, humble and transformative. He recalled the first notes she had played in the practice room earlier in the day, soft and tentative, yet filled with a depth he had not anticipated. At the time, he had dismissed it as a simple curiosity, a minor distraction, but now he understood that it had been a glimpse of the heart that had guided her performance. He had underestimated her entirely, assuming that skill alone defined mastery, and he realized that he had been wrong. Talent was more than speed, precision, and flawless execution. It was honesty, sincerity, and the ability to move others without calculation. As he sat quietly, the woman approached, carrying her sheet music and a small bag. She moved with calm confidence, her eyes meeting his briefly, acknowledging the shared experience without words. She had performed not for recognition, but for truth, and the effect had been undeniable. The pianist felt a deep respect, tinged with a hint of regret for the assumptions he had made earlier in the day. He understood that this moment was not about winning or losing, but about connection, learning, and the human capacity to communicate through music. He cleared his throat and spoke, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of humility. He thanked her for the performance, for sharing music in a way that had opened his eyes to a new understanding. She smiled softly, accepting the words with quiet grace, and nodded, acknowledging the sentiment without fanfare. The conversation needed no grand gestures. It was enough to recognize the truth that had been shared through the music itself. The townspeople who lingered noticed the subtle interaction, sensing the significance without needing explanation. There was a feeling in the air of something rare, a lesson that had been imparted not through words, but through the power of human expression. Some whispered about the unexpected turn of events, about the humble woman whose music had moved an elite pianist, and about the quiet lesson in humility and sincerity that had unfolded before their eyes. The evening had transformed into more than a performance. It had become a shared experience, a demonstration of the true power of art. The pianist reflected on his own journey, the years of training, the countless performances, and the relentless pursuit of technical perfection. He realized that in focusing solely on skill, he had missed something essential: the human element, the heart, the connection that made music meaningful. The woman had reminded him that audiences do not only respond to skill, they respond to authenticity, to emotion, and to the courage to express oneself fully and honestly. It was a lesson that could not be taught in a classroom or through practice alone. She moved to leave the stage area, and he followed, walking beside her as they stepped into the quiet streets of the town. The night air was cool and refreshing, carrying the faint scent of baked bread and the soft sounds of distant life. For the first time in years, the pianist felt the simplicity of life around him, unadorned by fame or expectation. It was grounding, humbling, and strangely freeing. The woman led the way to a small bench near the fountain, a place familiar and comforting to her, and they sat quietly, sharing the calm without the need for words. The pianist spoke again, reflecting on what he had learned, his voice softer now, less confident than usual, but rich with sincerity. He admitted that he had arrived in the town with arrogance, assuming that skill and reputation would ensure his triumph. He had challenged her without thought, expecting an easy victory, and yet he had been shown something he had never anticipated. She listened, her expression calm and accepting, understanding the weight of the moment. It was not triumph or defeat that mattered, but recognition of truth and the courage to express it. She shared her perspective quietly, explaining that music for her had never been about competition or recognition. It was a way to communicate, to express feelings and stories that words could not capture. She spoke of teaching children, of small daily joys, and the way simple experiences could inspire profound creativity. The pianist listened attentively, understanding for the first time that the human element in music was as essential as skill, and perhaps even more important. This was a revelation that would change the way he approached every performance in the future. The audience had slowly dispersed, leaving the hall empty except for a few lingering friends and family. The town returned to its usual calm, but those who had been present carried the evening in their hearts. They spoke to one another in low voices, marveling at the authenticity of the performance, at the unexpected lesson in humility, and at the reminder that true artistry could touch hearts without the need for accolades or recognition. It was a night that would be recounted many times, a story that would be passed down, not for fame or achievement, but for the demonstration of human connection and shared experience. The pianist and the woman walked back toward the bakery and community center, passing the quiet streets where life moved slowly but meaningfully. He observed the simplicity of the town, the warmth of human interactions, and the way ordinary life could inspire extraordinary moments. He realized that in his pursuit of recognition and mastery, he had overlooked the beauty that existed in everyday experiences, the small truths that could be expressed through music and felt deeply by those willing to listen. They paused near the community center, where the piano had been, and the pianist looked around at the empty hall. He thought about the performance, the audience, and the transformation that had occurred within him. He understood now that true artistry required more than technical skill. It required honesty, courage, and the willingness to share one's heart. The woman had demonstrated that fully, showing that music could transcend expectations and touch lives in profound ways. He turned to her and offered a final acknowledgement, a gesture of respect and gratitude. She smiled softly, nodding in quiet understanding, and they parted ways, each carrying the lessons of the evening. The pianist returned to his hotel, reflecting on the shift within himself, considering how he would approach music and life differently from that moment forward. He knew that he had been given an invaluable gift, the reminder that connection and authenticity mattered more than applause, that the heart of music was in feeling and sharing, not in recognition or mastery alone. The woman returned to her quiet life, baking bread, teaching children, and carrying on with the routines that had defined her days. Yet the impact of the evening lingered, both in her own mind and in the town around her. She had shared her music fully, touched hearts, and inspired change not through competition or recognition, but through sincerity and expression. The townspeople continued to talk about the performance for days, recounting the story of the humble woman whose music had moved an elite pianist and reminded them all of the simple, profound power of truth. For the pianist, the experience was transformative. In the days and weeks that followed, he approached his performances differently, seeking not only precision but connection, not only admiration but authenticity. The lesson he had learned in the small town, through the simple and honest music of one woman, became a guiding principle in his life and career. He understood now that music, at its core, was about touching hearts, sharing human experience, and expressing truth. In the quiet moments that followed, both the pianist and the woman reflected on the significance of the evening. They had crossed paths unexpectedly, their lives intersecting in a way that neither could have predicted. Through music, they had learned from one another. One, the power of authenticity and human connection, and the other, the importance of humility and the heart behind every note. The story of that night would be remembered not for the technical mastery displayed or the applause received, but for the emotional truth, the humanity, and the shared understanding that music could create. The small town returned to its calm rhythms. Yet the memory of the evening lingered in every conversation, in the quiet corners of the bakery, in the halls of the community center, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed the performance. The pianist would carry the lesson with him to grand stages and large audiences, while the woman continued her quiet life, knowing that the true measure of her art was not fame, but the ability to reach hearts. And in that quiet, human-centered way, the night had changed B.